Another in a series of presidential profiles, Warren Harding, 29th President of the United States.
We have our different theories about government, but we are all concerned about the welfare of our common country. I might add that I envy you your freedom from the cares that come to those in high position. For the man who occupies the office of the presidency cannot escape having a somewhat different feeling when he comes to realize his responsibilities for the welfare of this marvelous land.
Warren Harding never really wanted the responsibility of leading his country. He was simply a well-meaning, average man who wanted nothing more than a comfortable way of life. Instead, he became president, but he lacked the abilities to fill the job. His personal tragedy was the country's tragedy. Born in Ohio in 1865, Harding showed little ambition as a youngster, even though the family income was limited. He left high school before graduation, briefly studied law, then taught school for a year. He soon abandoned the teaching profession. The work was too hard.
I taught school for 1 year, and it was the hardest work I ever did in my life. I taught a country school under the old-fashioned methods, when the curriculum embraced everything from the ABCs to algebra and general history.
Then, at the age of 19, Harding found an occupation which suited his interests, journalism. For $300, he purchased his hometown newspaper, the Marion Star, and through the years, he built the paper into a successful business. His wife, daughter of the town's leading banker, was a major factor in Harding's success. Mrs. Harding was a pusher. Together, they ran the newspaper, and although the Star was pro-Republican in its views, Harding tried to instill a basic code of ethics into the publication.
If it can be avoided, never bring disgrace on an innocent man or child in the telling of the misdeeds or misfortunes of a relative. Never needlessly hurt the feelings of anybody. Be decent, be fair, be generous. I want this paper to be so conducted that it can go into any home without destroying the innocence of any child.
As America turned the corner into the 20th century, Warren Harding entered politics and soon gained a reputation as a good poker player, a vote-getter, a flowery speaker, and everybody's friend. In 1914, Harding was elected to the United States Senate, which he described as a very pleasant place. Although he did not introduce one important piece of legislation during his 6 years in the Senate, Harding was faithful to the party line, and certain party bosses began to push him toward the presidency. When the 1920 Republican convention deadlocked on his principal candidates, Harding was selected as a compromise nominee. He was picked by the bosses, giving birth to the expression of the smoke-filled back room. Harding accepted the nomination.
Mindful of the vast responsibilities, I must be frankly humble. But I have that confidence in the consideration and support of all true Americans, which makes me wholly unafraid. With an unalterable faith and in a hopeful spirit, with a hymn of service in my heart, I pledge fidelity to our country and to God, and I accept the nomination of the Republican Party for the presidency of the United States.
The public was tired of the insecurity and problems arising out of World War I. They were tired of strong, progressive presidents such as Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to return to a state of normalcy. And this is what Warren Harding promised the American public.
America's present need is not nostrums, but normalcy. Not heroics, but healing. Not revolution, but restoration. Not agitation, but adjustment. Not surgery, but serenity. Not submergence in internationality, but sustainment in triumphant nationality.
It was exactly what the people wanted to hear. And Warren Harding was elected president by a huge majority. Harding looked and spoke like a president and a statesman. He was neither, as America was destined to find out. When President Warren Harding took office, the country was still embroiled in the issue of the League of Nations. Woodrow Wilson had fought to put the United States in the League. The Senate had rejected his proposals. Harding believed that his election was a mandate from the people to stay out of the League.
There is no consequential dispute among us concerning the League of Nations. There are yet its earnest advocates, but the present administration has said repeatedly and decisively that the League is not for us. The issue of the League of Nations is as dead as slavery.
Instead of the League, Harding proposed a limited international court of justice. He, like the rest of the American people, sincerely wanted a permanent peace, but peace without sacrificing national independence in foreign affairs. Harding expressed his patriotic beliefs when he dedicated the tomb of the unknown soldier in 1921.
This American soldier went forth to battle with no hatred for any people in the world, but hating war and hating the purpose of every war for conquest. I revere that unknown citizen whose confidence in the righteousness of his country inspired belief that its triumph is the victory of humanity.
Harding also sought to prove to the world that he was not an isolationist by supplying food to the starving people of Russia. The Soviet Revolution had achieved success. The communist state of Lenin was in control, but the people were starving. Harding's Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, put it this way: 20 million people are starving. Whatever their politics, they shall be fed. President Harding agreed.
We do not recognize the government of Russia, nor tolerate the propaganda which emanates therefrom. But we do not forget the traditions of Russian leadership. We may put aside our consideration of all international politics and fundamental differences in government. The big thing is the call of the suffering and the dying.
Unfortunately for Harding, Hoover was one of the few honest men in the cabinet. Corruption was in the air at the start of the Roaring '20s, and Harding's trusting nature attracted many unsavory men to Washington. The president was oblivious to what was going on. He was only concerned in keeping the government out of the businessman's hair.
Less government in business and more business in government.
Harding was not interested in the details of his administration. He left that to his aides. Congress easily obtained the president's signature on their bills, pushing through items such as a protective tariff. The nations of Europe, burdened with war debts, needed to sell their products in America. A tariff was regressive, but Harding supported it.
I cannot too strongly urge an early completion of this tariff legislation. It is vital to the preservation of many of our own industries which contribute so notably to the lifeblood of our nation.
But now the handsome facade of Warren Harding began to crumble. Opportunities for graft were plentiful, and many of Harding's friends were reaping the harvest. Before long, a series of scandals began to break involving members of the cabinet. The most famous was the Teapot Dome scandal, which involved the leasing without competitive bidding of government oil reserves. Bribery had influenced Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall, an old friend of Harding's.
My friends, they are the ones that keep me walking the floor at night.
Fortunately for Harding, he did not live to face the public reaction to the scandals of his administration. Deeply distressed, he went on a speaking tour to vindicate himself to the American people, and died shortly after returning to Washington. He had never sought the presidency, and when he was suddenly elevated to office, he found himself unable to cope with its demands. Betrayed by his own inabilities and by the greed of his friends, he died a heartsick and disillusioned man.
I imagine that most people think it is a very wonderful thing to be the President of the United States. And it is a great distinction. But into the executive office there flow the griefs and dissatisfactions of the country. And more, there come to the executive echoes and reflexes of the problems and hopelessness of the situation of other nations of the world. It is a great responsibility to be the first officer of a government for people such as ours.
Another in the series of presidential profiles, Calvin Coolidge, 30th President of the United States.
Laws do not make reforms. Reforms make laws. We cannot look to government. We must look to ourselves. We must not stand in the expectation of a reward, but with a desire to serve. There will come out of government exactly what is put into it. Politics is the process of action in public affairs. It is personal. It is individual, and nothing more. Destiny is in you.
At a time when the destiny of America seemed forgotten in the rush and roar of the fast life of the 1920s, the nation fastened its political affection on a frugal, industrious New Englander, Calvin Coolidge. Born 7 years after the end of the Civil War, Coolidge was raised in the backwoods town of Plymouth, Vermont, a tiny village in the foothills of the Green Mountain country. This was the simple, uncluttered rural life that was fast disappearing from the American scene, victim of a nation flexing its industrial muscles. Coolidge often looked back on his boyhood with wistful yearning.
It'd be hard to imagine better surroundings for the development of a boy than those which I had. There was a daily contact with many new ideas. and the mind was given sufficient opportunity to thoroughly digest all that came to it. Country life does not always have breadth, but it has depth. It is neither artificial nor superficial, but it is kept close to the realities.
After graduating from Amherst College with high honors, Coolidge entered law practice in Massachusetts. But he soon turned his energies in the direction of a political career. Quiet and withdrawn, lacking the bluster of the typical politician, his future seemed doubtful. Yet Coolidge served in 19 public offices during the next 20 years. He suffered only one elective defeat in his entire career. The people admired his strong character and dedication to hard work. In 1915, he was elected president of the Massachusetts Senate.
Let the laws of Massachusetts proclaim to her humblest citizen the recognition of his manhood, the recognition that all men are peers, the recognition that all work is glorified. Such is the path to equality before the law. Such is the foundation of liberty under the law. Such is the sublime revelation of man's relation to man. Democracy.
Coolidge appeared to have reached the zenith of his political career in 1919 when he was elected governor of Massachusetts. But 1919 was the year the police force in Boston went on strike, when the police commissioner refused to let them form a union. The policemen walked off their posts. Criminals poured onto the city streets, and Governor Coolidge sent out the state militia. Samuel Gompers, head of the American Federation of Labor, protested this action, but Coolidge could not be swayed.
Your assertion that the police commissioner was wrong cannot justify the wrong of leaving the city unguarded. That furnished the opportunity. The criminal element furnished the action. There is no right to strike against the public safety of anybody, anywhere, anytime.
The silent man on Beacon Hill suddenly found himself a national figure. Coolidge was nominated as the Republican vice presidential candidate in 1920 and was elected to serve with President Warren Harding. 2 years later, Harding died in office. Coolidge received the news at the family home in Vermont. His father awakened him in the middle of the night. The senior Coolidge was a justice of the peace and a notary public, and on him fell the honor of administering the presidential oath of office.
Father, are you still a notary public? Yes, I am. Then you will administer the oath.
At the early morning hour of 3 a.m., by the light of a kerosene lamp, his hand on the family Bible, Calvin Coolidge solemnly pledged to uphold the Constitution of the United States. His father stamped the paper with his notary seal and was the first to call his son Mr. President. When Calvin Coolidge entered the White House, the country was rocking with indignation at the scandals of the Harding administration, most notably the Teapot Dome oil scandal. The people wanted honesty, idealism, and common sense. They found all these in Calvin Coolidge, a man of faith and undisputed moral principle.
We need to feel that behind us is intelligence and love. Doubters do not achieve. Skeptics do not contribute. Cynics do not create. Faith is the great motive power, and no man realizes his full possibilities unless he has the deep conviction that life is eternally important, and that his work, well done, is a part of an unending plan.
America was swinging full blast into the age of the Roaring '20s, the era of speakeasies, flappers, the Charleston. Calvin Coolidge stood in bold contrast to a nation on a rampage of prosperity and pleasure. He had honesty, refreshing calmness, and a conservative nature, presiding over a reckless, extravagant age. Coolidge did not interfere in the upward swing of the business boom.
When things are going along all right, it's a good plan to let them alone.
To Calvin Coolidge, the business of America was business, and he left it alone, refusing to use the powers of the federal government to check the country's spending spree. Government interference was repugnant to his political philosophy. Coolidge believed that the people, not legislation, would steer America back to a safer course.
The people cannot look to legislation for success. Industry, thrift, character are not conferred by act or resolve. Government cannot relieve from toil. It can provide no substitute for the rewards of service. The people must take care of themselves. Self-government means self-support.
Coolidge was elected in his own right by a large majority in 1924. At a time when Puritanism as a way of life was at its lowest ebb among the people chose a Puritan as their national symbol. Cautious and frugal, Cal reduced the national debt by $2 billion, vetoed 2 farm relief bills, and struck down a plan to produce Tennessee River. Coolidge strongly opposed any reduction of the European debts resulting from World War I.
The money we furnished, we had to borrow. Someone must pay for it. It cannot be canceled. If we do not collect it from Europe, we must collect it from our own taxpayers.
When Calvin Coolidge had something to say, he said it with as few words as possible. He was described as a well of silence, and his dry Yankee wit and frugality of words became legendary. Both characteristics were evidenced in his conversation with a woman at a Washington dinner party.
I'm going to tell you a secret, Mr. Coolidge. I made a little bet about you.
Coolidge did not pursue the matter. He picked at his food. The young woman was not easily put off by his silence.
I'll tell you what the bet was. I wagered that I could get at least 3 words of conversation out of you within 5 minutes.
You lose.
Coolidge was equally direct when a reporter asked him his future political plans in 1927. Saddened by the death of his 16-year-old son, Coolidge had decided to retire from public life.
Mr. President, could you give us some hint of your plans for the next campaign?
I do not choose to run for president in 1928.
Coolidge left office more popular than when he had entered it. His name untouched when the prosperity bubble burst in the Depression of 1929. A new concept of government was emerging over the horizon. But when the first 100 days of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal broke through the skies of poverty, Calvin Coolidge, the Green Mountain Boy, had gone home for the last time, returning to the land which had nurtured his faith in America and his faith in the eternal rewards of perseverance and hard work.
America is built on faith in the individual. Faith in his will and power to do right of his own accord. We believe in him not because of what he has, but what he is. This is a practical faith. It does not rest on any silly assumption that virtue is the reward of anything but effort, or that liberty can be secured at the price of anything but eternal vigilance.